Welcome to Truth Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode. I know I haven't been producing so many episodes lately. I've been taking a break and I am working on other projects, but don't despair, we're still going to make episodes from time to time. Do contact me and let me know any episodes you would like us to cover, any topics you would like us to cover. Today we're going to talk about scientism. We're going to return to the topic of flat Earth and talk about NASA with my guest Jeran. And I'll be putting some other episodes up soon. Remember, you can contact me at scottsentinel9@gmail.com. We do have a website, www.truthsentinel.co.uk. It's currently down at the moment as we don't have enough funds to keep it up, so donations always welcome. In the meantime, settle down, relax, and listen to today's episode. Thank you. So my next guest is Jeran. Jeran has his own YouTube channel called Jeranism. From what I understand, that is a play on the ism used in words such as postmodernism and the more recent scientism. And therefore it's Jeran trusting his own instincts and beliefs and knowledge rather than following those taught via mainstream science and establishment education. I can certainly agree that we should experience things for ourselves. I recently did an episode about flat Earth with Mark Sargent, so rather than cover the same ground, this chap will assume some knowledge of the topic of the flat Earth, and so go and check out that episode before this one if you like. So as I said, it's good to challenge your beliefs, even our most dearly held beliefs. That's definitely what the topic of flat Earth does. My own viewpoint, talking about something that happened billions of years ago or something that's billions of miles away as though it is fact is an assumption, because you really need to have been there at the time or to travel that distance to see whether it's true. So I agree with that aspect of it, and sometimes it's not often treated as assumptions by science, and hence the term scientism, I think. I still haven't seen enough indisputable evidence that the Earth is flat, but then again I think there are some compelling arguments that the flat Earth community have provided. Let's find out some more about it. So welcome to Truth Sentinel, Jeran.
Hey, thanks for having me, Scott. Appreciate it.
How do you define your reality? Let's start with that. How do you find your reality and your beliefs? Can you tell us a little bit about why you came up with the term Jeranism?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head earlier. Basically, when my wife and I kind of came out of religion, realizing that a lot of that was just more deception, I started a channel at that time, and I said I'm going to call it Jeranism because it's like meism, So for you it'd be Scottism, and for some, it's if I would have known where this was all going at that time, I probably wouldn't have named it that. But because it was more of just I'm going to do a channel where I'm going to talk about things the way I see them, and kind of discuss my life according to me, and so it was like Jeranism. But no, because I don't want it to have really any connection to the to the religious idea of ism, because I'm not a big fan of isms unless it's Jeranism.
Yeah, I get that. Obviously, though, you don't reject all scientific knowledge. So how do you go about choosing the kind of scientific knowledge you agree with and the kind that you sort of think is a bit dubious?
Well, I think that you have to look at everything, and I mean from religion to science to just everyday facts. You should really look at what's presented to you and decide, whether or not it matches your reality. And if there is another possible reason why that could be told to you. So, if I look at, why is my mom my mom? Is that really my mother? Well, she says she is, and my dad says she is, and my aunt was there. And if you really look at it and say, well, could she be making money off this by lying about it? Or is there, well, not really. In fact, she probably spent, tens of thousands of dollars raising me and had many nights of, anguish and frustration, I'm sure, with me. So that's enough evidence that I can look at that and say, you know what, I think that this is being told to me. What's being told to me is true. That is my mother, I'm her son. So if you kind of take everything that we get like that, and you just kind of weigh it out. And even if you do come to the conclusion that maybe somebody's lying about it, well, you can just keep that in the back of your head and, address each thing that comes to you as a separate thing. And I think for me, with regards to space travel and NASA and the shape of the Earth and these things, it's just I kept going to the drawing board and kept saying, okay, well, I'll give him that. Okay, well, I'll give him that. And you often hear people say, the thing that has the least amount of assumptions is the truth. And if you're going by that, well, then it's a no-brainer that there's so many assumptions that we have just granted these people about different subjects, be it the Big Bang, be it 4.54 million year old Earth, be it stars are 25 trillion miles away at the least. Those kind of things are really large assumptions. And if you're going to convince somebody that those things are facts, then to me they need to come with the kind of evidence that would, I think it was Carl Sagan, right, who said extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And, of course, Carl Sagan was saying that about religions, not about science. But it's the same thing for science. If you're going to tell me that I live on a ball and that I'm spinning and I'm flying through space, well, then I would hope that you would bring extraordinary evidence for that. And they don't really have any. They taught us when we were children, very young age. They taught us that believing in a flat earth was a ancient desert wandering idiotic belief. It's the worst thing you can call somebody is a flat earther. So those things to me are just signs when you go in and you look at it. Even you said in your little intro there that, while you may not believe in the flat earth, there's some very compelling evidence. Well, if I would tell you that the worst thing you could call somebody is a flat earther, and you looking into it have said now that there's some compelling evidence for it, that alone should perk your ears as to why is something that has been described as the dumbest thing that there is, why does that also come with compelling evidence? That's not the way it should work. And why is the thing that was taught to you as a first grader or second grader, why is that missing some of the evidence that really should be there? If we're going to be teaching first and second graders something as a fact, it should have an overwhelming amount of evidence. And that's...
Yeah, I agree with you about the assumptions. By the way, I'm sure your mother, if she's listening, would say that you didn't cause her that much anguish.
You don't know her. Maybe not too much.
Yeah, do you not think that some of this is more about those who trust science, which the general public at large tend to? They tend to trust science, and those that don't?
Yeah, I think it is about that, but I also think that is a direct result of the way science was taught. So it's not a matter of it's like people's fault because they trust science. Well, we were all taught about the scientific method, and that is the best way to get to the truth, or get as close to the truth as possible. Nobody's going to argue with that. The problem is that they taught science, and Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about science, and Brian Cox talks about science. They talk about it as if it's this otherworldly thing, as if it's not human beings at the helm of it. If it's, tests can't prove anything. There's no test that has ever proven anything, because it's a human being that has to look at the test results and then make an assumption about what that test is saying. So really at the helm, it's always been human beings, and human beings are corruptible. They are, they can be easily swayed with bribery. They can be threatened. They can be lazy. There's so many things that go into humans that we know as a fact. But for some reason, because of the way science was taught to us, and because Neil deGrasse likes to speak about it as if it's this otherworldly thing, he has a little science video up right now on YouTube where he says, I do a test, and a rival scientist of mine, he thinks he wants to prove me, he thinks I did it wrong. He wants to prove me wrong. So he goes and does a test. Well, even that alone, what he just said there, is not the way science works, because if there's a scientist who goes out and spends 3 years doing an evolution study on some birds in a tropical rainforest and comes to the conclusion that there's speciation and these species are changing or whatever, and publishes those results, okay, so that science test has been done. Well, there is no, a rival scientist. There is no scientist that doesn't believe in evolution. So who's the rival scientist that's going to go spend 3 years in a jungle following up on this test and doing his own test? And on top of that, who's going to pay for it? That's not, science is about funding and in order to get published in a journal, you need to have some exciting thing. That's how you make your name in the science business. You're not going to make your name by following up people's experiments for 3 years where you're not getting paid. That's a quick way to the poorhouse. So the way science is set up doesn't allow it to operate like they tell us. They kind of make it seem like it's this angelic like thing, and they talk about peer review, how great peer review is. Well, people just need to really think about that. It's like two turds asking each other if they stink, right? I mean, it's going to be, well, no, you smell great. Well, so do you. So, I mean, there's never going to be a good answer to some of these questions. And when you've got, I don't know how many people peer review papers, but let's say there's a couple hundred. You've got a couple hundred people reviewing a physics paper. Well, all those guys have spent 20 or 30 years talking about a certain subject in a certain way. So if a paper comes that is against everything that they've spoke about for 20 or 30 years, there's no possible way that paper will ever get printed, because they would have to admit that, oh, for 20 or 30 years we've been lying to people, or we've been completely wrong, and we missed this. So if that's the case, then people need to understand that there will never be basically everything has to go in the direction science is already headed. And that's a problem, because there is some things that can be groundbreaking and changing, but if maybe they will never get there. Now they just add things to the existing beliefs or the foundations, like gravity may not be correct. Their idea of gravity, because when they look in the galaxy, they don't see gravity acting as it should. So rather than do what science says is required at that point, which is go back and get a new theory, they just added dark energy and dark matter, and they've kept gravity there, because ultimately if you got rid of gravity like science says you should, then what's going to come into question next is, well, how are we a ball? How are we a sphere?
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you just said then, actually. Yeah, I think when it comes to, say, making small changes in science, then they can deal with that. But when it's large changes or going back to huge existing beliefs, they have a bit of a problem with that. They tend to mock if anyone sort of said that the theory of evolution is wrong, then they're not really going to listen to it and peer review it. So I totally agree with you there.
I don't know if you've seen it recently, but there's a California teacher or scientist actually down in a college down south, and his name is Mark Armitage, and he was in charge of this microscope lab. He's been one of the best employees in this lab. He trains people on these microscopes. In his private life, in his personal life, he's a Christian. That's something he never really let anybody know or didn't talk about. Obviously, he's a scientist in profession. Well, when he did a dinosaur dig recently, he found a Triceratops horn, and when dissecting it, found soft tissue in it. And so he published a paper, it got published in a journal, and he immediately got fired. And what people need to understand is that's the kind of thing I think you're talking about. When there's a paradigm shifting finding, and he's not the only one that's been found in multiple dinosaur bones, which means when you find soft tissue, the longest there's ever been soft tissue is like 20,000 years. And so that pretty much means, unless there's some huge fluke, that because I don't think you can say, oh, well, this happened to be trapped just perfectly that it lasted 67 million years. No. If it only, it's probably telling us that dinosaurs were much more recent than we think. And if that's not allowed to come out, well, then, people really need to understand what science is doing, that they've got their layout of how long they think everything's been here, and the Earth is this old, and evolution took this long. So things like discoveries like this by scientists that are getting fired, Mary Schweitzer, same thing happened to her. If they're getting fired for finding these are scientific findings. They're doing their job. They're finding dinosaur bones. They're finding soft tissue, which can be carbon dated. It'll come back between probably 10 and 20,000 years old. And science is not allowing that information to get out. They'd rather fire the person, and they just lost in court. So a lot of people may be saying, oh, that's not really true. Maybe they fired him for another reason. No, he just won in court $500,000 for improper termination because they terminated him for his religious views. Because that's the only, he published a paper, he did a scientific job. So it's just these kind of things should scream to people, we've got a big problem here. People are finding evidence and proof that dinosaurs are recent, yet that will never emerge in the scientific paradigm because it completely destroys their layout of how long we've been here and how we evolved.
Although doesn't another flat earther, Eric DeBay, say that dinosaurs are fake anyway?
He does, yeah. And I guess it just, I understand why somebody would say that, and it's because the idea of dinosaurs that we've been given, that we've been taught, is very fake. That the idea of something being 67 million years old, they don't know those things. And like you said at the beginning, it's an assumption, it's a theory, but those things are always open to new evidence like this. That somebody finds it, and okay, now we read. Well, when science goes forward and tells people that evolution is a fact. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. These are the dates. The Earth is 4.54 billion years old because it's a fact. Well, what you've done now is you've backed yourself into a corner to where any new information that's going to mess with that layout is going to cause problems. So me personally, I don't believe in the pictures of dinosaurs that they show us and they, all these kind of things that they force on you as a child because, again, they want to scare you with the whole idea of here comes a meteor, it's going to take out all the dinosaurs, and it could happen at any time to you. But no, I don't know if he really thinks that they don't exist because obviously, big animals exist and, there's several types of animals that don't stop growing. Like a lot of people don't realize that kangaroos don't stop growing. So if one was left by itself and in a place where it could get enough food, a kangaroo could grow to unknown size. We don't know how big it could get. So I just look at dinosaurs and I say the same thing. I don't think there was a lot of them. I don't think it was like they were roaming all over the planet or something. To me, it's just they're just large animals that got quite large before humans got here. When humans got here, they were able to kill off a lot of animal species because we are intelligent. So if there was a big animal, some sort of big dinosaur that was a threat to a community, they could outsmart the dinosaur or whatever and kill it, or whatever the animal may be, a woolly mammoth. That's why there's no real big predators out anymore, because humans can outsmart and take them out. So that's what I think about that.
One thing I really like about the whole topic of flat Earth and about even dinosaurs as well is if you say to the average person on the street, I don't think dinosaurs exist, or I don't believe in evolution, or maybe the Earth's flat, they'll just laugh and say it's ridiculous. But most of that comes from, again, the total trust in the mainstream, generally held beliefs of society, rather than any knowledge on the topic. Like they've never seen, dug up any dinosaur bones themselves. They don't know anything about evolution. They don't know anything about their solar system or how, most flat earthers, I'll give them credit, know more about the solar system and how the Earth is supposed to function in the sphere model, than most people on the street who know pretty much nothing. So I think it's very interesting from that point of view. I wanted to move on though and ask you about NASA. On your website there's a lot of mention of NASA lies, and a lot of flat earthers talk about NASA lies and the fake ISS. Now I would definitely agree there's much to doubt when it comes to moon missions, probes, pictures from space. But how do you move from personally having some doubt as to whether what they're saying is true to being sure that they're lying?
Well, for me, it comes to never being shown any kind of evidence that would lead me to think they're telling the truth. So it's not like sometimes they give me some good evidence and sometimes they give me some bad evidence. And maybe it takes really looking into them and seeing all that they put out. The only thing that tells me, and I mean the only thing that would make me say to myself, am I really seeing this correctly, is the amount of garbage they put out. It seems overwhelming. It seems almost, you could put out half that amount and still be at the same place. There's really no reason to continue to put, a spacewalk once a month and all these probes. But when you really look at the money that they're bringing in, they have to have a excuse for what they're doing with it. I mean, $53 million a day. And that's something that's hard for people to even wrap their minds around. But, if I gave you $53 million once and said, hey, I want to see you do some stuff for humanity, imagine what kind of things you would have to show to show that you've done a good thing with that $53 million. Well, NASA gets that every day. And if you look at what they've done absolutely nothing. They have faked moon landings. They have faked some other missions. They've taken some CGI pictures. They have done absolutely nothing for the human race. And people who don't see that, I don't know why, they just are sold on this whole idea of space travel. They've been convinced that this is a upstanding organization. One thing people don't realize that NASA does that's an absolute and total travesty is we pay for their research, obviously. It's all of the Americans who give taxes. And when they discover a new patent, so they get a patent for some particular software system, or they get a patent for something, well, that should be the communities. What they should do is turn around and open source that when they're done using it, and allow that would drive competition in businesses, right? All these businesses get to use this patent, and that would drive prices down. Well, what do they actually do with it? They auction it off to the highest bidder. So what happens is I pay for research with my tax money. They do the research, they come up with things, then they patent that, which is hiding it from me. Then they sell it to the highest bidder so that some rich organization who has the most money, can buy it and then charge a lot of money, and that drives prices up because the person who gets that patent can now charge a higher price because they're the only company that has that patent. And so NASA is screwing us every direction, every which way they can. It is a total scam to the American people, and people don't see it. They also build little fantasy parks. You can go to Johnson Space Center, or you can go to one of these little places in Alabama or something where you can go and look at rockets, but it's like $100 to get in. So that's like I'm buying a theme park. It's my money that they're building it with, and then they're going to charge me to get in. Those kind of things tell me that we've got a problem. That this is not the way a quote unquote civilian or government space agency should be acting. And then also I hear people sometimes say, okay, well, they didn't go to the moon in '69, but they've gone on some secret space missions. I'm like, secret space mission? I don't pay my taxes to be lied to. I don't give permission for people to do secret space missions on my tax dollar. So if this was a donation system to where anybody who wanted to donate to NASA could donate to them, then I would have to shut my mouth, because if somebody wants to donate money to you or donate money to the Church of Satan, that's on them. I can't stop somebody from what they do with their money. But this is not a donation system. This is a mandatory removal of my tax money to pay NASA to lie to me, to sell patents that I purchased at a higher price to the highest bidder, and to build space parks and charge me to get into them. That is not, I don't authorize, or I don't agree with that expenditure of my money, and that's what's terrible. I mean, I can't afford a rocket. My neighbor can't afford a rocket, but by all of us putting our money together, we have enough money for a rocket, so we give it to NASA and say, okay, here, build us a rocket. They should build a rocket and show us what's up, and that's their job. Yet, what I just said, everything else is what they do. They basically gouge you more. It just is a complete and total scam. And then on top of that, what they find and what they discover is being taught to my children. So if I have a big problem with that, because I don't agree with what they're teaching, and I shouldn't have to donate money and watch my children learn facts that I don't agree with.
What do you make of the videos coming out with the views of Hurricane Irma from space and the Cassini pics of Saturn and things like that?
Well, the Cassini ones are a total, scam. They're a joke. I don't put anything on them. I don't think that they're at all real. I hope people understand that all the scientists who build that spacecraft, once they're done building it, they hand it off to NASA and they never see it again. They'll see the rocket take off, it goes out to space, it gets released, it flies over to Saturn, whatever. But they never see video of it. All they get is tones. And so, to me, it's so easy to have a man behind the curtain, since space is mathematical and you had to plan this thing's orbits and its journeys mathematically, that it would be very simple for the man behind the curtain to program its path into the computer, so that a scientist sitting at a computer assumes they're looking at the path of Cassini. And as far as the hurricane, I think that some of those are high altitude video, but for the most part, especially with this most recent one, I don't think a lot of that looked very real to me. I think a lot of it looks computer generated, and we're at a place now where computer generated imagery is indecipherable from reality. They're at a place where they can do augmented reality, they can do We've seen evidence of it. I showed a recent video. There's a show here in the United States called The Big Bang Theory, and some episodes that they've had recently have one of the characters on the ISS, and he flicks floating pens and things exactly what we see from NASA, but we know that this person isn't in space. So people need to get through their heads that just because we see people who say they're on the space station, there's no proof that they're on the space station. There just isn't. That it could easily be done in the studio. I think as a human race, we owe it to ourselves to challenge NASA to turn and make sure that this is true. And this should already be done. When a group of us started coming out and talking like this, even if, let's say, you don't believe what we're saying, but you should look at us and say, well, we're all humans, and these guys look like they're trying to protect me as well. And then we all turn to NASA and say, okay, prove this. And if they do, then you can turn back at us and say, see, you idiots, I told you it was true. And if not, well, then we uncovered a huge deception. The problem with this is we are not even getting close to NASA because they've attacked the very idea that we're just challenging and saying, it's not like we're doing it for ourselves. It's not like I'm trying to protect myself. I'm trying to protect everybody on this earth from a huge deception that I think is obvious.
I think when it comes to the pictures or the images that NASA produce, they should make it clear which are photos and which are animations, because they don't, basically. So they're left with people assuming that things are photos when they're animations. The Cassini ones, I would agree, just look very dubious. And then they probably turn around and say, well, no, that's an animation. So they need to be clear. I agree also that recently they showed a picture of the Earth from Saturn, which is a little white dot, and I thought, well, why couldn't they take pictures as they were leaving Earth with this probe, and different size pictures of the Earth? Why a white dot? So I agree with you on that. I guess some people would say, general members of the public would say, you're being paranoid if you don't trust a big military government organization like NASA. I'm only saying members of the public would say that. I of course wouldn't necessarily say that.
Well, one thing I would say to them is, the very first thing is my senses tend to be correct at all times, and so does everybody else's, or else they wouldn't be alive. When you cross the street, you use your eyes to look both ways. You use your ears to make sure there's no cars coming. That's throughout our entire day, our senses are constantly being used. And it just so happens that in places that our senses fail us, it happens to fail us because of what we're told. I'm told that the sun is 1,000,000 times as big as the Earth. To me, it looks very small. I'm told that the Earth spins. However, it looks to me like the sun and moon go across my sky. I don't think there's anybody on this Earth that watches the sunset and thinks to themselves, "Ooh, I'm falling backwards right now," because clearly they're not. And what I tell people all the time, because they always tell me, "Well, we're spinning and we're flying through space, but it's no acceleration, so that's why we can't tell." I say, okay, time out. If you believe that, so you've now adopted what science has told you. You've adopted what astronomers have told you. So I said, at what speed would you question it? And they don't, they said, what do you mean? I said, okay, well, we're going 66,000 miles per hour around the sun. So what speed would I have to say for you to say, now I doubt it? And the answer should be none, because it's all the same. You've already adopted the idea that if we're going at constant speed, it cannot be felt. So if I tell you we're going 3 trillion miles per hour around the sun, you shouldn't have a problem with that. You should say, okay, and then if I say we're going 400 quadrillion miles per hour, then you have to say, okay. If you are not okay with that, then you need to understand why we're not okay with the 66,000. The reason I'm not okay with that is because it could be any number. That it's not like, oh, I have a problem with 66,000. Well, it could be 20,000, could be 80,000. There is no direct connection with reality, with whatever number they've given us. It's just same thing with the sun size. They tell us the sun is 1,000,000 times the size of the Earth. Well, it could be 1,000,000,000 times the size of the Earth, and you wouldn't argue it because you've already accepted the words of men without, like you said, they haven't not done any measurements themselves. They can never measure the speed of the Earth. They can never, Einstein said that there's no optical experiment that can measure that the Earth moves at all. So what it looks like to me is that anywhere where our senses can't follow through to the point of measuring things, it seems like somebody is taking advantage of us. So we can't know how long the Earth's been here, so somebody tells us how long it's been here, and we have to believe it or we're considered idiotic. And that's a problem. If science was really so confident in their truths, then they don't need to demean people or call them names or use that threat of, non-intellectualism or whatever you want to say. That's what science uses as their tool, and that really forces people to just bow down and accept whatever these words they say. And for me, I don't need to do that anymore. I don't need to count on men to tell me how fast the Earth is spinning. If I felt like I was being tugged to the east every day, and then science said, "Oh, by the way, you're spinning," I would say, "Oh, that makes sense because I feel this tug towards the east every day." But we don't feel anything, and the people are saying, "Oh, well, it's because you spin and it's because you fly through space." And at that point, we need to ask, well, is this just a case where my senses are just failing me? And why is it that my senses only fail me when, number one, a lot of people will say, "Oh, well, have you seen those optical illusions online or on videos?" And it's like, yeah, well, those are set up to fool you. That's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about the Earth, and your life around you is not set up to fool you. And just so happens that, like, the distance to stars. I mean, people are smarter than that, in my opinion. If you go outside tonight and look at the stars are not 25 trillion miles away or further. That they're right there. You can see that they're so close. How close? I don't know. They could be 1,000 miles. They could be 10,000 miles. How would I know? But I do know that when you're talking 25 trillion, that is outrageous, and it needs to come with the kind of evidence that would be required to convince somebody of something so preposterous. A trillion seconds. So 1 trillion seconds is 33,000 years. So people don't even understand how big of a number a trillion is, let alone 25 trillion miles for the closest star. And that is outrageous. It's simply outrageous. And if you do the history, look at the history of that, basically when Tycho Brahe was talking to these astronomers of the day, and they were saying that they thought we went around the sun, and he figured it all out and said, it's impossible what you guys are saying because the stars would have to be trillions of miles away. And then he died, and Kepler took his work, and the next thing you know, stars are trillions of miles away. So it's a really easy get out of jail free card for them. It's a really easy thing, and it's also, like we said, the most assumptions. Well, you have to give them that assumption that the stars are 25 trillion miles away. I don't think there's anything that tells us that. All you need to do is look at our own sun. That's 8 light minutes away, because it takes light 8 minutes to get here. So if we double the distance to the sun, and the sun would get about half the size or whatever, then we're talking about 16 light minutes. And then you do it again, double the distance, and then you're at a half hour of light time. And then do it again, and you're at an hour. Well, you need to keep going until you get to trillions of miles, or 5 or 6 light years. Well, we were just talking about light days or light hours. We're not even close to years yet. The sun would not be seen even from the outer solar system, let alone from 25 trillion miles away. So I mean, you can just figure this stuff out on your own, that you either can just erase your mind and don't think about things and just let them be the boss of you and be the boss of your mind, or you can question it, and there should be nothing wrong with questioning it. If science is what science says it is, then it should be open to questioning things, because that's what science is. Yet they're not open to that.
Yeah, there definitely should be nothing wrong with questioning most things, really. I saw your video with the Big Bang Theory clip. Yeah, it did look just as good as the ISS videos, I have to say. I agree with you that if you go up to someone on the street again and say the sun could just be only 3,000 miles away, I don't think it deserves mocking and laughing, because really it could only be 3,000 miles away to the person on the street, at least, because they have no way of checking. So really it is down to, basically they're laughing because you've said something that disagrees with the majority beliefs as given to us by science. I guess a lot of people, they think, well, there's all these people, these scientists that are really hyper intelligent, much more intelligent than me, and they can use algorithms and equations, and so they must know what they're talking about, and so I'm going to put my trust in them. I think that's what most people do. But I think also one thing a lot of people probably haven't considered, members of the public I mean, is that the Earth's spinning. It does mean that the atmosphere and the air is spinning as well, right?
Yeah, it has to be connected to the Earth, or else you would have, for instance, planes should go faster if you're going west, because the Earth is spinning towards you as you're flying in the plane. But they say that's not the case, that when you are flying, that the entire air around you is moving at the same speed the ground is. It's the most ridiculous belief that there is. I mean, and when I say it's ridiculous, I don't want people to take it the wrong way, because 5 years ago, I believed all those same things. So I'm certainly not saying, oh, I'm smarter than you or I know more than you. It's just once you've given yourself a chance to review the information and you're open to the chance of maybe I was lied to, let me look into this for myself, you will inevitably come out on the other side realizing that you've been lied to. That it's just getting people over that hump of allowing themselves to. That's another thing science has done, is they've really put this kind of fence up to where if you dare go down that road, somebody who believes in science and is very scientific, or if they even start to venture down that road, that person is afraid of, what are people going to think of me? What if I do find out that NASA might be lying? What if I do find out we didn't go to the moon? And a lot of people do not feel comfortable in that. They feel more comfortable just going along with science, going along with what science says. And I think it's an excuse for people to be dumb. I think that if you were formerly religious and you got out of religion and you found science, then you probably went there and just said, okay, now I like these guys. They're talking truth. They talk evidence. And it allows people to go around, like people in my comment section, and just say, oh, you moron, you stupid idiot, science, dude, get a physics book. Well, that, and like you said earlier, I know 10 times more than that person does about the heliocentric model. But because I'm going against what they believe, they'll just call me names and say, go get a physics book. So that doesn't make you smart. But people are allowed to go around YouTube or go around and think that they are smart. And they feel like they're in the smart crowd.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah, let's talk about the ISS. Yeah, I would agree. There's some dubious outages sometimes, like it goes offline quite a lot of the time. There's some things I've seen in videos. If I was looking, I might say, yeah, that's a bit weird. The weird hair thing, I totally agree with. I mean, why are so many of the women on the ISS? Why do they have such long hair? Like it would seem to make sense from a practical point of view and from a hygiene point of view that women would have fairly short hair on the ISS. So I don't understand why they've all got these long hair, and it almost does seem like they're doing it just to say, look, I'm in a weightless environment. But that's me starting to get a little bit paranoid and thinking, do these flat earthers have a point here? So I wonder sometimes if you start looking for things though, then you might see it. I mean, have they ever screwed up big time? That's the thing. I mean, I've looked at some of the videos and I've seen ones. I've heard the talk about the green screen, the use of green screen, and I've seen things that look a bit dubious. But I haven't seen anything that's like, yeah, that's 100%. This is not real, and that's the problem for me. Is like with all of these things, you could look at them all together and sort of say, okay, yeah, I believe it's a flat Earth because of all these things together. But
right.
If you look at one thing alone, like the ISS, I can look at it and say, yeah, maybe it's not real, but I can't look at it and say it's definitely not real.
Well, what I would say is to that is I agree with you that the big Easter egg or the finding of all findings will be when somebody finds something like that. Now, here's why I don't think it'll happen is because none of what they do is live. You could never know. They can write the word live on the screen all they want. But believe me, if this is a deception like I'm saying it is, then everything is run through at least a 5-minute buffer to where if there ever was any kind of mistake that was detrimental or catastrophic, that it would be taken out. So in my opinion, you will never find a mistake like what we're looking for. The other thing is that you have to look at things that make no practical sense. One of those for me is there's no 24/7 view of the Earth from the ISS. That alone tells me something's wrong because they've got satellites up there, they say, and they can provide a video feed. So why wouldn't that video feed be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? They goes black or blue screen about every 45 minutes or so for about a half hour. And if science is what they've always told us and satellites work the way they told us, then there is no reason why we wouldn't have a 24/7 video feed of the Earth from space. That craft has been in orbit 17 years or 18 years, and they've never provided that once. The other thing is, if you just go and listen to astronauts' interviews on the ISS, so ISS astronaut interview, just look that up, and watch about 5 or 10 of them, and you'll notice real quick that what NASA tells us about who these scientists are, who these astronauts are, they say that they hire one astronaut for 4,000 applicants. So when I hear that, I'm thinking, okay, so 4,000 people applied for NASA, and one of them gets selected to be an astronaut. That person better be sharp as a whip, because to even apply to be an astronaut, I'm assuming you have to have a college degree. You probably have some training or some sort of specialty. And so when you're picked out of that group of 4,000 to be the one astronaut, well, I'm assuming you would be so intelligent that you would leave me in awe. Listen to these people on the ISS. They are actors. They are not scientists. They are not smart. I don't think of myself being smart at all. I could talk circles around these astronauts. They cannot answer the questions that are asked to them by high school students or junior high school students that are saying, tell us about what experiments you're doing on board. I've never heard them answer that question with an actual experiment. They follow it with, well, we're doing a lot of science to, increase the scientific understanding, and we're really trying to, everything is this general generalities, these glittering generalities, where they're just not actual scientists. That you can tell, go talk to a scientist, look up a scientist interview, and listen to a scientist talk about his field, and then go and watch the ISS astronauts and listen to them talk. You're talking about night and day, two different types of people. One, it looks like, is in it for the money and is in it for fame, and they put their little smirks on their face, and it's just not real scientists doing real science in the ISS.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a good point, actually. I hadn't thought about that one before, and but staying on the same topic of personalities of astronauts, the video of the moon mission astronauts giving interviews after the first moon landing was strange. They don't look very excited, to say the least, and that's been used by a lot of people to sort of say something weird's going on there. I wondered, though, whether it's partly because they're people who, as you say, are selected from thousands of people, and our scientists are quite kind of, let's just say they're not the most exciting people. They're not the type that go out partying too much, and they're into their equations. And I read on your website, I was reading a NASA document about the derivation of a linear aircraft model, and my brain nearly imploded just right. trying to read it, because but if these astronauts do read that kind of stuff and they have to sort of understand it, then could though that astronaut the astronaut interviews after the first moon landing just be, well, they're kind of dull people, they're not going to be like really excited to go to the moon because they're not very exciting people, but then the ISS people, as you say, are quite different. They're all personality, let's fly around the ISS. So they are quite different to the moon landing guys anyway.
Yeah, there's so many red flags with the astronauts. I mean, that after interview, but you're right. You could chalk that up to being they're very stoic and they're very heroic and they don't have a lot of time to mess around and be happy. But really, when you look at all the astronauts that have been to space or went to the moon, they all have their individual issues that you should see, with them. I mean, Alan Bean, when somebody was talking to him about the Van Allen belts, and he said, well, I don't think we went that high. And they said, oh, well, the Van Allen belts are, 35,000 miles from the Earth, or actually I think it's further than that, but they say how far the miles are from the Earth and how far they went out. And he says, oh, well, we went right through them. And I think he also says, oh, well, we went before they discovered them, as if that helps you get through the radiation. So these guys all have their problems. I mean, Neil Armstrong was the first man on the moon, and he went into hiding the rest of his life and granted only a few interviews to NASA, rare interviews. This man went into hiding. He didn't want to be a public person. And again, you could chalk that up and say, well, he wasn't a very public person and he didn't. Okay, that's fine. Buzz Aldrin went to the bottle, became an alcoholic. Again, these things can happen to everyday people as well. So it's not just saying, oh, it's just because they faked this moon mission. But there's so many things. I don't know if I know it's not something that is known worldwide, but the whole Gabby Giffords shooting that happened in Arizona in 2011, If anybody's done any research into that event, it was another hoaxed event by the government of the United States, and her husband is, Mark Kelly, an astronaut. And so all these things go into my decisions. Not as simple as saying, oh, I don't want to believe in NASA, so I'm just going to say the Earth is flat. That this is a bunch of research, and every direction you look, you start to find reasons not to trust these people, from them being all Freemasons, as far as them taking the Freemasonic flag to the moon. These kind of things should make people really look into what's going on. I mean, look at what NASA did with the shuttles. This is something that Americans should stand up and scream about, because we had 6 craft. Now, granted, 2 of them crashed or blew up. So we had 4 shuttles that took people to and from space. Okay, that's what they did. They flew to space, they docked with the ISS, and they came back to Earth. Well, NASA took all 4 of them and put them in museums and canceled the program, and now we pay $86 million a seat to fly astronauts to the ISS. That should make people flip out, because it makes no sense. It's not logical in any way or shape or form. There's no way fixing, if they were broken, then spend that money on fixing the crafts, and then we'll fly ourselves to space. Why would you pay, and this is $86 million a seat every time we fly on the Soyuz to the ISS. Believe me, there's nothing that's being done on the ISS that's worth $86 million, period. Let alone having to pay that multiple times for multiple astronauts to go multiple times on multiple trips. And there's nothing that makes an excuse for why would you get rid of a vehicle that did exactly what you needed the vehicle to do. The vehicle flew to space and back. So, those kind of things just make me really have to say that they've never given me any sign of being anything other than deception at the highest level, and employing children and kids. They not kids, but they employ looks like people fresh out of college. They employ it just doesn't seem like a real organization that I would expect it to be. And could I be wrong? Sure. But I tell everybody also, don't trust me. Whatever you do, if you believe in things that I say without researching them, then you're doing the exact thing that I think got us in this predicament in the beginning. That people need to research, and I'm confident about that because I have yet to really find very many people that have done the amount of research and come out on the other side and said, no, I still think that we went to the moon, or no, I still think that Sandy Hook was a real shooting. And I respect people if they at least do the research. So if somebody tells me, hey, I've done the research, I've spent 3 weeks on it, and I think the Earth is a ball, I want to have a conversation with that person. I want to talk to them and say, well, what kind of things did you find? What kind of, I respect that person's opinion. The opinions I don't respect are the ones of people who won't give it the time of day, or just immediately dismiss it as, well, you idiot, we were taught that the Earth's a ball and it's been that way for thousands of years. We've known for thousands of years. That's where I say, okay, well, I can't respect that person because they are just simply believing in the words of men, which, if there's anything people should realize is that every person in your life has lied to you. Even people that love you more than anybody else have lied to you. So if you look at everything that's gone on in this world, at least during your lifetime, you should realize that anytime somebody has an opportunity to get one over on you, they probably will. Not all the time, but we're always cognizant of that, right? When we take our car in to get fixed, we're always thinking, is this person going to try and, gouge me with something that I don't need? We see these things around everywhere in our life, but for some reason people draw the line at science and NASA as if they could get one over on you, they wouldn't. And I just don't think that's a safe, until you've really looked into it and you've discovered, no, they look like they're on the up and up. Well, then I think you need to question everything that they do, and enough people don't do that.
Yeah, definitely. Enough people don't look into most things enough. A couple more questions. One aspect of Flat Earth that's a bit of an obstacle for some is the idea that all the countries must be in on this, then, like Russia, China, even North Korea, Iran, all the countries that supposedly anti-West, they must all be on this as well. Otherwise, they would blow the whistle on it. How do you explain that?
Well, that's a tough one because it depends on whether or not they've been in, I guess you could say inducted into this lie. I think that a majority of the nations are in on it. I think that that's it's a way for governments to steal money from people, and it's not as if we have when we have wars, nobody's ever come over and bombed the White House. The United States hasn't gone over and bombed the Kremlin. That we fight it out between citizens out in fields. And I think that really when people look at it, they'll realize that it's about keeping people in fear. It's about keeping people powerless and knowledgeless. They say knowledge is power, and the lack of knowledge is the lack of power. So the governments seem more to me to be about basically staying in power themselves, and then also making sure their people are never able to usurp them. And really, when you look at it, I mean, when's the last time some government has, assassinated another, leader? It doesn't happen because it seems like they all are in it together. Now, the American government might get together with the CIA or something and take out John F. Kennedy, but that's not another country doing that. That was within our own circle of people that decided to do that act. So it seems like really it doesn't surprise me that you would have countries who on the outside from us looking at it say, well, these countries are, because that's what they want you to think. So they don't want you to think that they get along. But really when you think about wars and things like that, well, obviously these countries got along. I mean, World War II, after Germany was taken out, well, the United States took some scientists and Russia took some of the gear, and then here comes Germany right back up. It just kind of seemed like that's not what really would happen, you wouldn't think, in a war. Like everybody just got along at the end. But if you really look at it, I mean, we dropped nuclear weapons on Japan, and now they just get along with us. I mean, there's just a lot of weird things about wars and these battles between countries that make you really have to wonder how much of it is being played out. Not that I'm saying it's not real. I do think it is real, that people die in wars. But how much of it is being kind of set up as a theater? They call it the theater of war. Because it is kind of playing out and it makes people very fearful. The whole idea of the nuclear weapons scare and the, in the Cold War was about scaring Americans, was about scaring people. I think the space race was the exact same thing. I think it was all by design. And these are things that let's say that Russia didn't put up Sputnik. Well, if America knew that and they said, well, we're going to go to the moon, and they would know full well Russia's not going to say anything, because if Russia says anything, then we'll tell people that they lied about Sputnik. So it becomes if your neighbor robbed banks and so did you, you're probably not going to call the cops and rat out your neighbor. You're going to kind of coexist as bank robbers, and you may not work together. You may not even, be friends, but you're going to allow each other to do what you do because you are not going to want that person to rat on you because you're not going to rat on them. So it kind of seems like that's the way the countries work. And if you notice, all the space agencies, or a good vast majority of them, use the vector symbol in their logo. And that to me is kind of like a sign of initiation. It's almost like we're doing what you're doing. We know what you do. We're going to do the same kind of deal, to where you put that in your logo and now you're part of the club. And NASA can never say anything. And the reason I know this to be true too is if you watch some of the Chinese stuff and they had a Chang 3 lander on the moon. You can look that up. It's absolutely atrocious. It is so fake. And NASA doesn't come out and say anything about it. In fact, if you go to NASA's site and look it up, they have one image next to one paragraph that says, on this date, the Chinese lander landed on the moon. They show one image. Well, that's pretty indicative of the fact that they don't want to show more images than that because it's clearly a fabrication. And what they want to do is just say, okay, this happened, and okay, bye. Because they have to let it go. They cannot call it out as being fake, because if they did, they're going to get fingers pointed right back at them. So they would just rather let it go. And there's just not a lot of countries that do space launches right now. I don't even know how many there is. Probably 6 countries that even can launch, and I think only 3 that can put people in space. So it wouldn't surprise me if places like Iran don't know. It wouldn't surprise me that they wouldn't know that if they do put up a satellite or something like that, I'm assuming they go through another space agency who probably puts it up there for them. I don't think that scientists are all in on it. I don't think DirecTV's in on it. These people think that they're buying satellites and putting those up in space. And if NASA knows how to do that with a balloon or in a cheaper fashion, they're going to still charge $350 million. They're going to take that money from DirecTV and they're going to put up a $50 million balloon or whatever and pocket the rest. And I think that's what they do. So the least amount of people that can know the truth is best, and the most amount of people that can trust what you're doing as fact, the best, because those become your teachers and your professors and your big science backers. And so as many people as can believe it. That's why I think Neil deGrasse and these guys, I don't think they're liars. I think they're believers. And when you have a believer, you don't have to worry so much about them because they believe it so much that they won't make mistakes. You know, if Neil deGrasse was an actor, they would have to worry about him constantly because he could change his mind. He could say something wrong. But when he's a believer, that's your best asset.
Last question. The globe versus flat Earth seems a kind of circular argument, to excuse the pun, but it goes around in circles unless there's some definitive proof provided by the flat earthers. It just feels like it could never be resolved. I saw one of your recent videos about measuring the curve. What are you planning to do with that? Do you think it will really prove once and for all there's no curve?
Yeah, we've kind of looked at it a couple different ways now. We've had some people give us some ideas to make it even better. I guess what I'm looking for mostly is a experiment that proves it to me, because everything, like I said, everything that I've done, it's a collection of all my research. But really the problem with it is there is no measured curve that I myself have seen. And so I can never believe that the ocean curves and that there's people standing upside down underneath me, and those things do not have the kind of evidence that I would need to believe that. Now, if I did this, I wanted to find a test that if it went in the direction that showed that the Earth was curved, that I would believe that. And this test started out and still remains that way. I don't think anybody might feel the opposite way. I don't know if there's any globe believer who would say, well, if this test shows that there is no curve, then but for me, we're going to go do the test, and I'll explain it in a second. And then what we're going to do is, if it shows what I think it'll show, then we're going to do it again. And the next time we go out, it will be with professional camera crew, a real, a surveyor or a couple of them. We'll send letters to the media telling them what we're going to do, and we'll make it a big deal that way. The reason I want to do that is because I want to have a video that I can just have up to where if people call me names or say, well, why do you believe this, that I can easily refer to a measurement that showed that the Earth isn't curved. And so what we're going to do by a river, there's a offshoot of the Sacramento River here in California. They have one stretch. It's called Victoria Slough or Victoria Canal. It's a 4-mile straight shot stretch of river, and it's not a flowing river. It's kind of a stagnant slough. It's always pretty full, and so since water is your baseline, and so when they give us a number like 8 inches per mile squared, they're saying that number is assuming that the Earth is a perfect sphere, right? We know it has mountains, we know it has valleys, so it's hard to measure the curvature of Earth because it's always different. But when you're talking about the surface of water does curve at 8 inches per mile squared, because that is the basis, that is the sea level. That's what everything's based off of. So if you take a river like that, what we're going to do is basically set up a laser and a theodolite on one end, and then some posts every half mile, so 6 total posts down to 3 miles. And then we're going to shoot that laser, and where it hits that first post, we're going to mark it, and then we're going to keep going all the way till it hits that final post. And then with a theodolite from the other side of the river, what a theodolite can do is it can actually measure the distance from the surface of the water to the point where that laser hit that post. So by doing that first test and measuring, okay, how far is this from the water? Let's say it's 5 feet. Well, when you move down to the 3rd mile and you measure that distance from the water to the laser pointer, it needs to be 6 feet higher. So if it's 5 feet from the water surface on the far left side, then on the right side it needs to be 11 feet from the water surface, which would prove a curved Earth. I think anybody who just thinks rationally doesn't need that experiment to prove it to themselves, because for me, if I'm standing looking at a body of water from left to right, it's 3 miles long. If the water on the right-hand side is actually in reality 3 or 6 feet lower, then the river would flow that way. That it can't be level. And So it's one of those kind of mind benders, but I think people need to see it to actually believe it.
I was listening to one of your detractors today. Do you know the Five Red Pears guy, Graham?
No, I've heard of him before.
He talks about you anyway. He was talking about the curvature, trying to explain it. I must admit, it was very boring. He was talking about pressures and all sorts. That's part of the problem, I think. The scientific explanation for some of these things is just very dull. It was a long explanation video.
Well, I mean, imagine this: that where are you from? Where do you live?
I'm in Thailand at the moment, but I'm from England.
The water on the globe is level at all places, so it is level with me. So everything would match exactly as put on a flat Earth because the ball is always the same distance to the center of the Earth. And again, that's a great metaphysical idea. It's even a good theory. But the problem with it is well, then I need to see evidence that there is such thing as a sphere that pulls things to the center, and there's not even one example of that. The only thing that they can give you for an example is the Earth. Yeah. Well, that's not a good enough example. It's just in school, use a word in its definition. And it's the same thing. You cannot prove that the Earth is a ball by saying that the Earth is a ball. That's not proof. And there is no evidence anywhere of things pulling to the center of anything. That people have said to me before, well, what about the bubbles of water in the ISS? I said, yeah, they squirt it out of a little straw. I said, go get a pitcher of water and dump it out in the ISS and tell me what happens. It will never create a sphere, even though it should, because water has mass and mass should pull things together. There's no evidence of anything creating a sphere. There's no evidence of things pulling to the center of spheres. It's just that has been told to us as a fact, even though it's never been shown. It can't be shown in a lab. Science is about repeatability, testability, falsifiability. None of those things match what we're told about the Earth. So is it a possibility? Sure, things could all pull to the center of spheres. In which case, yes, the surface of the water in Australia and the surface of the water in California would be equal distance from each other, or equal distance to the center. But I don't think we have the kind of evidence to just de facto say that is the case. And the reason this test is a little bit different than other tests is because, if you take like a 3,000, that Lake Belau in Russia is 300 miles long, and many people said, okay, and every winter it freezes over. So it's a flat piece of ice, and people say, well, can't we just go measure that and see that it's flat? Well, science says it's flat too, because anywhere you measure, the surface of that ice would be equal distant to the center of the Earth in their world. So even that we can't use. But the difference between this experiment is by using a laser and getting it off of the water. We're not doing it above the water. We're doing it next to the water. That gets rid of refraction, which has been used in the Bedford Level experiment many times before. It ended up being the reason, because science gets to employ certain things. When you see things further than you're supposed to, they say, oh, that's because of refraction. It's a 17% standard refraction. They just get to add that, almost as if they made an error in how far we should be able to see things. And so they get to add a 17% fudge factor whenever we see something we're not supposed to. So it's kind of the same kind of system, to me at least, that looks like there's a problem. And if we send this laser across and it's off the water, so now they can't use refraction, and if it stays level, there's no excuse that they can use. I mean, their next excuse would be that gravity is bending the light with the shape of the Earth. And if that's their next thing, well, people should start getting the point that they will just employ magical things whenever possible. That then we have to look into how we're going to prove that gravity doesn't bend light to the shape of the Earth, which we know it doesn't. But again, like I said, some of these people are never going to admit it. Neil deGrasse Tyson will never, ever admit that the Earth is not a ball, because it means that he's been lying to people for 30 years. So the human psyche won't allow him to come to that conclusion. So he will fight it, as will many scientists. Probably for till I'm gone.
Running out of time, really, but I wanted to ask you one quick question, which you can just give a short answer to. But have you got anything to suggest to people who are kind of on the edge, they're kind of almost flat earthers, that they should look at, which would sort of tip things over, maybe something that did the same for you, that would convince them one way or the other?
Oh, I think just water in and of itself. I'll just give it that answer. That we use water for Egyptian water levels. They use water in spirit levels. Water finds its level. That's what water does. If it's a cup of water, if it's a bath of water, if it's a pool, if it's a lake, that we know water always finds its level. And they just want you to believe, and it just so happens again, that it's just outside of your vision. It's just outside of your senses. Even though all your senses tell you that water lies flat, if you go a little bit further than your senses can see, then you have to believe that water curves around like a ball. Get up in an airplane. I went in an airplane after I became a flat earther and looked. As you start to think about these things, they're going to reveal themselves to you everywhere you look. That now when I go up in an airplane and I look across, it's so clear to me that the water goes off as far as I can see, right or left, flat. And then it gets hazy at the horizon, and now I'm just supposed to magically believe that it goes off an edge, and then 4,000 miles after that is sideways. There's not sideways buildings anywhere in the world. There's not upside down buildings anywhere in the world. It's just a metaphysical belief where they've placed us all at the top of the globe and said everybody gets to the top of the globe, which is metaphysical. It's not reality. You can't just say, well, my perspective says that I'm at the top, but you're at the top in your perspective. You can't live life with just what your perspective is. Otherwise, when you walk by a homeless person, you could just think to yourself, well, in my perspective, that guy's very well fed. I don't have to worry about him. It's not the way you operate life. You can't just say, well, my perspective is this. You have to take other people's perspective into play. And if you do that, then you'll realize you can't live on a ball because somebody is standing at the bottom of the ball looking up. Somebody's looking down. Somebody's looking sideways. Well, that's not the way their world works. In their world, everybody is below your horizon. So you can't have everybody below everybody's horizon. In fact, I'm below your horizon and you're below mine horizon. That it's a metaphysical idea that has not been, we have not been given the kind of evidence that should cause us to believe in that.
Well, if we do live on a globe, I am actually talking to you upside down from the other side of the world. You've been in California, me being in Thailand at the moment.
You're like perpendicular.
Your website is www.jeranism.com. Is that right?
Yeah, it's down right now, but it'll be up in a day or two.
Yeah, and your YouTube channel, Jeranism, again, people should be able to find you on there, yeah?
Yep, it's Jeranism. And come on by, watch some videos, and appreciate everybody who does and who shares it. And if you like the videos, just share it on your social media. And I tell people all the time that if they don't feel comfortable telling their friends or family and you'd like a video that I've done, just drop the video and say, this idiot thinks the earth is flat. And that'll get them to at least watch it.
Yeah, good idea. Thanks ever so much for joining us. It's been great talking to you. I would love to chat to you again because I've sped through some of the questions just because I'm strapped for time, but I would love to chat to you again at some point.
Okay, I'll give you a homework assignment. Watch 5 interviews from the ISS astronauts, and you tell me how smart you think they are.
Okay, I'm going to do that. I'll do that now, actually. And anyone else who's listening, hopefully there's somebody listening, try and do the same. Listen to the interviews from the astronauts on the ISS. Yeah, thanks for joining us, Jeran, and appreciate it. Bye. Do you not think that some of this is more about those who trust science, which the general public at large tend to? They tend to trust science, and those that don't?
Yeah, I think it is about that, but I also think that that is a direct result of the way science was taught. So it's not a matter of it's like people's fault because they trust science. Well, we were all taught about the scientific method, and that is the best way to get to the truth, or get as close to the truth as possible. Nobody's going to argue with that. The problem is that they taught science, and Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about science, and Brian Cox talks about science. They talk about it as if it's this otherworldly thing, as if it's not human beings at the helm of it. If it's, tests can't prove anything. There's no test that has ever proven anything, because it's a human being that has to look at the test results and then make an assumption about what that test is saying. So really at the helm, it's always been human beings, and human beings are corruptible. They are, they can be easily swayed with bribery. They can be threatened. They can be lazy. There's so many things that go into humans that we know is a fact. But for some reason, because of the way science was taught to us, and because Neil deGrasse likes to speak about it as if it's this otherworldly thing, he has a little science video up right now on YouTube where he says, I do a test, and a rival scientist of mine, he thinks he wants to prove me, he thinks I did it wrong. He wants to prove me wrong. So he goes and does a test. Well, even that alone, what he just said there, is not the way science works, because if there's a scientist who goes out and spends 3 years doing an evolution study on some birds in a tropical rainforest and comes to the conclusion that there's speciation and these species are changing or whatever, and publishes those results, okay, so that science test has been done. Well, there is no, a rival scientist. There is no scientist that doesn't believe in evolution. So who's the rival scientist that's going to go spend 3 years in a jungle following up on this test and doing his own test? And on top of that, these people about different subjects, be it the Big Bang, be it 4.54 million year old Earth, be it stars are 25 trillion miles away at the least. Those kind of things are really large assumptions. And if you're going to convince somebody that those things are facts, then to me they need to come with the kind of evidence that would, I think it was Carl Sagan, right, who said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And, of course, Carl Sagan was saying that about religions, not about science. But it's the same thing for science. If you're going to tell me that I live on a ball and that I'm spinning and I'm flying through space, well, then I would hope that you would bring extraordinary evidence for that. And they don't really have any. They taught us when we were children, very young age. They taught us that believing in a flat earth was a ancient desert wandering idiotic belief. It's the worst thing you can call somebody is a flat earther. So those things to me are just signs when you go in and you look at it. Even you said in your little intro there that, while you may not believe in the flat earth, there's some very compelling evidence. Well, if I would tell you that the worst thing you could call somebody is a flat earther, and you looking into it have said now that there's some compelling evidence for it, that alone should perk your ears as to why is something that has been described as the dumbest thing that there is, why does that also come with compelling evidence? That's not the way it should work. And why is the thing that was taught to you as a first grader or second grader, why is that missing some of the evidence that really should be there? If we're going to be teaching first and second graders something as a fact, it should have an overwhelming amount of evidence. And that's...
Yeah, I agree with you about the assumptions. By the way, I'm sure your mother, if she's listening, would say that you didn't cause her that much anguish. I can't believe
you don't know her. No, maybe not too much.
Yeah,
But no, because I don't want it to have really any connection to the, to the religious idea of ism, because I'm not a big fan of isms, unless it's Jeranism.
Yeah, I get that. Obviously, though, you don't reject all scientific knowledge. So how do you go about choosing the kind of scientific knowledge you agree with and the kind that you sort of think is a bit dubious?
Well, I think that you have to look at everything, and I mean from religion to science to just everyday facts. You should really look at what's presented to you and decide, whether or not it matches your reality. And if there is another possible reason why that could be told to you. So, if I look at, why is my mom my mom? Is that really my mother? Well, she says she is, and my dad says she is, and my aunt was there. And if you really look at it and say, well, could she be making money off this by lying about it? Or is there, well, not really. In fact, she probably spent, tens of thousands of dollars raising me and had many nights of, anguish and frustration, I'm sure, with me. So that's enough evidence that I can look at that and say, you know what, I think that this is being told to me. What's being told to me is true. That is my mother. I'm her son. So if you kind of take everything that we get like that and you just kind of weigh it out, and even if you do come to the conclusion that maybe somebody's lying about it, well, you can just keep that in the back of your head and, address each thing that comes to you as a separate thing. And I think for me, with regards to space travel and NASA and the shape of the Earth and these things, it's just I kept going to the drawing board and kept saying, okay, well, I'll give him that. Okay, well, I'll give him that. And you often hear people say, the thing that has the least amount of assumptions is the truth. And if you're going by that, well, then it's a no-brainer that there's so many assumptions that we have just granted
via mainstream science and establishment education. I can certainly agree that we should experience things for ourselves. I recently did an episode about Flat Earth with Mark Sargent, so rather than cover the same ground, this chap will assume some knowledge of the topic of the Flat Earth, and so go and check out that episode before this one if you like. So as I said, it's good to challenge your beliefs, even our most dearly held beliefs. That's definitely what the topic of Flat Earth does. My own viewpoint, talking about something that happened billions of years ago, or something that's billions of miles away, as though it is fact, is an assumption, because you really need to have been there at the time or to travel that distance to see whether it's true. So I agree with that aspect of it. And sometimes it's not often treated as assumptions by science, and hence the term scientism, I think. I still haven't seen enough indisputable evidence that the Earth is flat, but then again, I think there are some compelling arguments that the Flat Earth community have provided. Let's find out some more about it. So welcome to Truth Sentinel, Jeran.
Hey, thanks for having me, Scott. Appreciate it.
How do you define your reality? Let's start with that. How do you find your reality and your beliefs? Can you tell us a little bit about why you came up with the term Jeranism?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head earlier. Basically, when my wife and I kind of came out of religion, realizing that a lot of that was just more deception, I started a channel at that time, and I said I'm going to call it Jeranism because it's like meism, so for you it'd be Scottism, and for some, it's if I would have known where this was all going at that time, I probably wouldn't have named it that. But because it was more of just I'm going to do a channel where I'm going to talk about things the way I see them, and kind of discuss my life according to me, and so it was like Jeranism.
Welcome to Truth Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode. I know I haven't been producing so many episodes lately. I've been taking a break and I am working on other projects, but don't despair, we're still going to make episodes from time to time. Do contact me and let me know any episodes you would like us to cover, any topics you would like us to cover. Today we're going to talk about scientism. We're going to return to the topic of Flat Earth and talk about NASA with my guest Jeran. And I'll be putting some other episodes up soon. Remember, you can contact me at scottsentinel9@gmail.com. We do have a website, www.truthsentinel.co.uk. It's currently down at the moment as we don't have enough funds to keep it up, so donations always welcome. In the meantime, settle down, relax, and listen to today's episode. Thank you. So my next guest is Jeran. Jeran has his own YouTube channel called Jeranism. From what I understand, that is a play on the ism used in words such as postmodernism and the more recent Scientism, and therefore it's Jeran trusting his own instincts and beliefs and knowledge rather than following those taught